The galaxy was at peace, or so humanity had believed. Beneath the surface, tensions simmered among the stars, but Earth and its allies in the United Earth Coalition had grown complacent, believing they were safe from the chaos that had gripped other regions of space. But that illusion shattered when the Nikari arrived. A shadow descended across human space, like a storm cloud blocking out the sun. It came without warning, a wave of warships so vast, so powerful, they made even the most advanced fleets tremble in fear. The Nikari were not simply invaders, they were an unstoppable force. Their ships, dark and angular, exuded a malevolent aura, their weapons capable of tearing through entire planets in the blink of an eye. The first target was Arcadia, a lush world on the edge of human space. The Nikari descended upon it in the dead of night, their ships blotting out the stars. By the time the Arcadian defense fleet mobilized, it was already too late. The planet's shields fell within hours, and the inhabitants, millions of peaceful colonists, were slaughtered without mercy. The rest of the galaxy watched in horror as Arcadia was reduced to rubble, its once vibrant cities now nothing more than ashes. The message from the Nikari was clear: surrender or face annihilation. The United Earth Coalition, still recovering from the brutal war with the Renari hegemony years earlier, was slow to respond. The initial shock of the attack left Earth's leaders paralyzed, each wondering if this was the end of humanity's reign in the galaxy. But Admiral Lena Kor, one of the few commanders with both the experience and the resolve to lead in such a dark time, quickly took charge. "We have one chance to survive," Kor said, her voice steady but grim as she addressed the Earth Defense Council. "The Nikari won't stop until we're wiped out. We need to fight back, but we need something beyond our fleet, something they can't destroy. We need to build the Crimson Bastion." The room was silent. Some of the counselors muttered their doubts, while others looked to Kor with skepticism. The Bastion was a concept, a dream, not a reality. A force so powerful it could shield entire worlds and stand against the might of an alien empire. But Kor was unyielding. The traditional methods of warfare wouldn't work. Humanity was outmatched, outgunned, and on the verge of collapse. The only option left was to innovate or perish. "The Bastion is the only thing that can give us a fighting chance," Kor continued. "We'll need to mobilize every resource at our disposal. Every scientist, every engineer, every soldier. The future of the human race depends on this." Dr. Ewan Relis, one of the galaxy's foremost military engineers, stood at the back of the room, his mind already racing with ideas. Though many doubted the feasibility of such a massive undertaking, Relis had always been a man of action, a believer in the impossible. The Bastion wasn't just a weapon, it was humanity's last hope. He had the vision, and he had the resolve. And now he was about to commit everything to ensuring its success. As the council agreed to the plan, a sense of urgency gripped the room. Earth's fate was no longer uncertain, it was inevitable. But in this moment of desperation, humanity found its will to fight. Kor's voice rang out across the room, stronger than ever. "We will build the Bastion. We will fight for our survival. And we will show the Nikari that humanity is not a species to be extinguished. Not now, not ever." Outside, the stars seemed to shimmer with a cold, indifferent light, as if to mock the fragile hopes of those who dared to stand against the darkness. But in the hearts of Earth's leaders, a fire had been lit. The fight for survival had begun. The announcement that the Crimson Bastion project was officially underway sent waves of shock and disbelief across the galaxy. The design of such a weapon, an indestructible fortress capable of repelling an overwhelming alien force, was almost beyond comprehension. Yet in the wake of the Nikari's devastating assault, it became the only lifeline humanity had. Admiral Lena Kor, now the project's commander, faced a new and more daunting challenge: assembling the team that would bring the Crimson Bastion to life. As the clock ticked down, the pressure mounted. Humanity's future rested in the hands of the men and women who would undertake this monumental task. Dr. Ewan Relis stood at the center of this effort. A tall man with sharp, calculating eyes, Relis had earned a reputation as one of the galaxy's foremost engineers. His past work on advanced defense systems had earned him the respect of his peers, though his unorthodox methods had sometimes earned him as much scorn as admiration. But now, as he stood in the bustling assembly hall of Earth's highest command center, he knew this would be his crowning achievement, or his greatest failure. "Let's make history," Relis muttered under his breath as he gazed over the blueprints for the Bastion. It was a structure beyond anything humanity had ever conceived. Planetary shields capable of absorbing the full force of Nikhari weaponry, a fleet of mobile warships housed within its walls, and an artificial intelligence so sophisticated it could think and adapt faster than any human could. But to make it real, they needed resources Earth simply did not have. "Dr. Relis," a voice interrupted his thoughts. Admiral Kor strode into the room, her expression hard as steel. "How's the progress?" "Slow, but steady," Relis replied, not lifting his eyes from the schematics. "We're dealing with an unprecedented scale here. This isn't just another orbital station or defense grid. It's a massive, mobile bastion, capable of taking on an entire fleet of Nikhari ships." "You're telling me the designs are still theoretical?" Kor's voice was cool, but Relis detected the frustration in her words. Time was running out. The Nikhari had already decimated several colonies, and Earth's defenses were barely holding. "We're pushing the limits of what we know about physics, and we're not exactly getting help from the rest of the galaxy." Relis leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I need more time, more resources. I need the full might of the United Earth Coalition if we're going to make this work." Kor's gaze softened just a fraction. She knew how close humanity was to the brink. "You'll have what you need. I'll make sure of it. Just don't waste this chance. If we fail, humanity dies with the Bastion." As Relis nodded, a shiver ran down his spine. He wasn't sure whether it was the weight of the responsibility or the realization that no matter what, failure was no longer an option. Meanwhile, Earth's military forces began to mobilize in response to the Nikhari's growing assault. The Coalition's resources were stretched thin, and several smaller colonies fell before reinforcements could even arrive. But on Earth, the grim resolve to survive was beginning to harden into something more, something like defiance. In a high-security lab, a team of military engineers worked alongside Relis, designing the Bastion's shield generators. These weren't ordinary defense systems. They were capable of absorbing energy from a star itself. The idea was audacious: convert solar energy directly into a weapon capable of repelling anything the Nikhari could throw at them. But the technology was experimental, and its success was uncertain. Every day the engineers tested and retested the generators, tweaking them with new calculations, trying to create a defensive shield strong enough to withstand the Nikhari's overwhelming firepower. At the same time, Admiral Kor turned to an unexpected source of help. The remaining human colonies scattered across the galaxy had begun to rally to Earth's cause. The refugees, former soldiers, and engineers from the destroyed colonies were now her strongest allies. Even in the darkest hours, the spark of human ingenuity and unity burned bright. "Let them try to break us," Kor said during a video conference with the colony's leaders. "We will rebuild stronger. We will rebuild together." Relis, deep in his work, barely noticed the passage of time. Weeks turned into months, and as the Bastion's construction progressed, humanity's situation grew more dire. Yet every new breakthrough, no matter how small, kept the spark of hope alive. But Kor knew the truth: time was their most precious commodity. Every moment spent designing, testing, and refining the Crimson Bastion brought them closer to salvation, but it also brought them closer to being too late. The Nikhari were relentless, and their next strike could be humanity's last. The first blow from the Nickeri had been swift and brutal, but it was the second wave that truly tested humanity's resolve. As the construction of the Crimson Bastion moved forward, Earth's defenses were stretched to their breaking point. Each day, new reports flooded in, another colony lost, another city reduced to rubble. The Nickeri weren't content with just striking. They were eradicating entire civilizations, obliterating everything in their wake. Humanity's allies had already fallen, and now the final battle for Earth had begun. Admiral Lena Kor stood on the observation deck of Earth's Central Command Center, her gaze fixed on the swirling chaos outside. The Nickeri fleet, vast and relentless, was nearing Earth's orbit. The Bastion wasn't ready, not yet. The prototype shield, still being fine-tuned, was the only thing standing between Earth and total destruction. The shield's activation would be a gamble, a desperate measure to buy enough time for the Bastion to be fully armed. If it failed, humanity's last hope would collapse before it even had a chance to rise. "Admiral, the Nickeri fleet has entered the system," came the voice of Captain Jara Thorne, Kor's second-in-command. "We're on their radar. No turning back now." Kor nodded, her face a mask of determination. "Prepare the fleet. The prototype shield goes live in 30 minutes. She turned to the holographic display, where a series of red blips marked the advancing Nickeri ships. The Nickeri had advanced tactics and superior firepower, but Kor had always believed that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology, it was their adaptability. While the Bastion wasn't ready for full-scale combat, Earth's remaining fleets had been restructured and reinforced with experimental weapons based on the Bastion's designs. It wouldn't be enough to win the war, but it would be enough to buy the time humanity needed to finish building its greatest weapon. Kor's voice rang out, steady and clear, across the command center. "We fight. We give everything we have. We hold them off long enough to finish the Bastion. That's all that matters now." As the fleet mobilized, a series of tactical strikes began. Humanity's warships, smaller and less advanced than the Nickeri dreadnoughts, danced around the enemy forces with agility and desperation. The experimental weapons, based on the Bastion's technology, fired in quick, calculated bursts. They didn't have the raw power of the Nickeri ships, but they were designed for precision, to exploit the weaknesses in the alien armor. For the first time, the Nickeri were forced to retreat, but Kor knew it was a temporary victory. The Bastion wasn't ready. Not yet. Hours later, the fleet was battered and broken. Only a handful of ships remained operational, and the Nickeri were preparing for their next assault. Kor stood at the edge of the command deck, watching the reports come in. The shield prototype was their only chance, but it had never been tested in battle before. It had only a fraction of the power it needed to hold off the full force of the enemy. "Activate the shield," Kor ordered, her voice unwavering. Dr. Ewan Relis, now overseeing the final adjustments from Earth's Central Engineering Lab, watched as the shield's core powered up. The energy readings were off the charts, the system barely holding together under the strain of the rush to finish it. Yet, as the shield activated, a shimmering barrier of light erupted around Earth, casting a translucent dome over the planet's surface. For a moment, it seemed like a miracle. The Nickeri fleet, confident in their overwhelming superiority, pressed forward. Their first barrage of missiles and energy blasts struck the shield. The dome flickered, a ripple running through it, but it held. The shield absorbed the full force of the attack, deflecting the incoming weapons like raindrops off a glass window. But the cost was immense. The energy reserves powering the shield began to deplete at an alarming rate. Humanity's makeshift fleet continued to provide support, but the Nickeri were now concentrating their fire on the shield, testing its limits. Kor watched as the shield's power level dropped to dangerously low levels. "We need to hold them off for just a little longer," she whispered to herself, hoping against hope that the Bastion could be completed in time. The shield could only buy them so much time, and every second that passed brought humanity closer to being overwhelmed. As the battle raged on, Dr. Relis frantically monitored the shield's output from the engineering hub. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he made last-minute adjustments to the power distribution systems. The prototype was never meant to last this long, and its failure was imminent. But if they could just hold off the Nikari for a little longer, perhaps they could make it. In the silence of the engineering lab, Relis made a silent vow: humanity would not go down without a fight. Even if this shield failed, even if the Bastion itself was not yet fully operational, he would ensure that humanity's spirit, its will to survive, would endure. The shield shimmered, crackling under the onslaught of the Nikari's relentless assault. Humanity's final line of defense, the last hope for survival, flickered with each impact, a fragile barrier holding the dark forces at bay. Admiral Lena Kor stood on the command deck, her face pale as the power reserves of the shield continued to drain. Each second that passed felt like an eternity, each explosion sending a jolt of anxiety through her veins. "Admiral, the shield's power is nearing critical levels," Captain Jara Thorne reported, her voice tight with tension. "We can't sustain this much longer. If we don't activate the Bastion soon, we'll lose Earth." Kor clenched her fists. The Bastion was still incomplete, a massive structure still in the final stages of assembly. But they had no choice. If it wasn't deployed, humanity's final defense would fall. The Nikari knew no mercy, and Earth's forces were too few to push back their overwhelming might. "Activate the Bastion," Kor commanded, her voice firm. The order sent a ripple of movement throughout Earth's command center. Engineers scrambled, and the last of humanity's remaining warships shifted into position, ready to deliver the final push. Dr. Ewan Relis, at the heart of the Bastion's construction zone, had spent the last several months pushing the boundaries of technology. It wasn't just a defense structure, it was a weapon, a city, and a fortress all in one. But even he knew it had not been fully tested. It was a gamble one humanity could not afford to lose. Relis paced in the control room, his fingers flying over the console as he monitored the activation process. The Bastion's core hummed to life, its systems online but fragile. The energy that powered it was derived from the same prototype shield that was now buckling under the strain. If the Bastion's energy reserves didn't sync with the shield's, it could result in catastrophic failure. "System checks complete," one of the engineers said, voice strained. "The Bastion is online, Dr. Relis. It's ready for deployment." Relis took a deep breath. They'd come this far. It had to work. Deploy it. Across the sky, the silhouette of the Crimson Bastion rose from its hidden location, a massive, gleaming structure. At its heart, the core reactor pulsed with raw power, a beacon of light in the darkness. The Bastion itself was a marvel of human ingenuity, an impenetrable fortress suspended in space, capable of absorbing the full force of a star's energy and unleashing it with devastating force. Its exterior gleamed like a living thing, vast enough to dwarf entire fleets, a testament to the ambition of the human race. At the Bastion's base, a fleet of warships, smaller than the Nikari behemoths, but equipped with cutting-edge weaponry, prepared for the coming battle. They would be the first to engage, holding the line while the Bastion's full capabilities were brought online. "Bastion deployed," came the report, a burst of hope threading through the tension-filled atmosphere. Shield systems activated. Relis's heart raced as the Bastion's energy core surged with power, synchronizing with Earth's remaining shield. The two forces, once disparate, now fused together into a cohesive defense network. The combined power of the Bastion's weaponry and the shield created an impenetrable force, radiating a force field of light that extended far beyond Earth's atmosphere. Kor watched from the command deck as the Nikari fleet began its descent. They had no idea what they were walking into. The first wave of enemy ships approached, their weaponry charging for another devastating strike. But as they neared the Bastion's perimeter, something shifted. The Bastion's weapon systems hummed, and suddenly, the air was filled with the sound of 1,000 charging cannons. Brilliant beams of energy, drawn directly from the Bastion's core, shot out with precision and force, striking the Nickari ships like meteors. The first wave of the enemy fleet was obliterated in a single glorious moment. Ships were torn apart by the intensity of the blast, their hulls disintegrating into dust before they even had a chance to retaliate. It was the beginning of the end. The Nickari, stunned by the sheer power of the Bastion's response, hesitated for a moment, recalculating their strategy. But Kor knew it wouldn't be enough to stop them entirely. The Nickari were relentless. Even though the Bastion had proven itself to be a deadly weapon, they would adapt. They always did. "We can't let up," Kor said, turning to Thorn. "We've bought ourselves time, but we need to strike now before they regroup." Relis's voice came over the comms, calm yet tinged with urgency. "Admiral, the Bastion is holding steady, but we'll need to recalibrate the weapon systems before it can fire again. It's going to take time. Don't let the Nickari regroup." The battle was far from over. But for the first time since the Nickari had invaded, humanity had a fighting chance. The Crimson Bastion was awake, and it was ready to show the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. The war was only just beginning, but Earth's defenders now held a weapon powerful enough to change the course of history. The Nickari fleet reeled from the unexpected ferocity of the Bastion's opening salvo. For the first time since their arrival, they hesitated, their massive ships retreating momentarily to regroup, their leaders unsure of how to proceed against such a formidable weapon. But they wouldn't be deterred for long. The Nickari were relentless, and their resolve to eradicate humanity remained as strong as ever. On the command deck of the Crimson Bastion, Admiral Lena Kor watched the retreating enemy ships with a mix of triumph and grim calculation. The first wave had been decimated, but she knew that the Nickari were not easily cowed. Their tactics would evolve, their strategies would shift, and it was only a matter of time before they struck back with even greater fury. "Status report," Kor demanded, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. "Energy reserves holding steady," came the voice of Lieutenant Hara, the Bastion's operations officer. "But we're pushing the limits. The reactor is stable for now, but we need time to recalibrate the weapon systems." Kor turned to Dr. Ewan Relis, who was overseeing the operations from the control room deep within the Bastion's core. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he ran diagnostics on the Bastion's systems. The weaponry had fired at full power for the first time in centuries, and now the strain on the reactors was immense. "We can't afford a second shot with the systems in their current state," Relis said, his voice tight. "It's going to take time to bring everything back online. I recommend at least an hour of recalibration." An hour? The Nickari wouldn't give them that long. Kor's mind raced. "We need to hold them off. Buy us time for the Bastion to recharge." "Understood," Thorn replied, nodding as she worked quickly to mobilize the remaining human fleet. "We'll put up a defensive line. If we can force them to engage at range, we might be able to delay their advance long enough." The Bastion had given humanity a fighting chance, but it was still incomplete. The first wave had proven its might, but the Nickari fleet had already begun to recover. Their warships, heavily armored and bristling with weaponry, began their second assault, more coordinated than before. Their tactics shifted, no longer relying on brute force, but on precision strikes, targeting the weaker points in humanity's defenses. The human fleet fought valiantly, their ships darting in and out of cover, firing on the Nickari with everything they had. But they were outnumbered, outgunned. Their only advantage now was the Bastion, its massive form looming over the battlefield, a silent giant in the sky. "Engage at maximum range," Kor commanded, watching the Nickari approach. "Give them no quarter. Hold them off until the Bastion can fire again." The human ships positioned themselves in a staggered line, creating a barrier between the approaching Nickari and the Bastion. The Nickari retaliated with a flurry of energy blasts, sending shockwaves through the human fleet. One ship exploded in a burst of light, debris scattering across the battlefield. But the human forces held firm, refusing to give ground. Kor gritted her teeth. She couldn't lose any more ships. Not now, not when Earth's last hope was so close to being fully operational. She watched as her fleet fought with every ounce of their will, determined not to let the Bastion fall before it could reach its full potential. The battle stretched on, a brutal exchange of firepower and strategy, each side gaining and losing ground in the eternal dance of war. Kor's heart raced as the seconds ticked by, praying that Relis and his team could finish recalibrating the weapon systems in time. Then, just as the human fleet began to show signs of faltering, the Bastion hummed to life once more. The massive shield surrounding it shimmered, and the energy reading spiked. "We're ready," Relis's voice crackled over the comms. "The weapon systems are online." Kor's pulse quickened. "Target the largest Nickari vessel. All fire on that ship now." The Bastion's main cannon powered up, a brilliant beam of energy charging in its core. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Then, with a deafening roar, the cannon released its fury. The beam shot across the expanse of space, faster than the eye could follow. It struck the lead Nickari ship with devastating precision, the energy searing through its shields and into the core. The ship shuddered, its hull crackling and warping as it struggled to remain intact. Within seconds, the Nickari dreadnought shattered, disintegrating in a ball of fire and debris. The shockwave rippled through the remaining Nickari fleet, and for the first time, the invaders faltered. The combined might of the Bastion's power and the human fleet's desperate resistance had delivered a crippling blow. But Kor knew this was only a brief victory. The Nickari would not retreat for long. They would regroup, adapt, and return with even more fury. Yet in this fleeting moment, humanity had proven something undeniable. They were not a species to be wiped out easily. They would fight to the very end, and as long as the Bastion stood, they would hold the line. The explosion of the Nickari dreadnought was a moment of triumph, but Kor's mind remained razor-focused. She had seen enough of the enemy's tactics to know this was only a temporary setback. The Nickari fleet, though stunned by the destruction of their flagship, was not defeated. Their aggression would return, stronger and more coordinated than ever. But humanity had bought itself time, a precious commodity in the heat of war. The remains of the destroyed Nickari ship floated in the void, a smoldering wreck, but the Nickari were not without resilience. Within moments, the remaining fleet began to regroup, adjusting their positions to avoid the Bastion's destructive beam. They were learning, evolving. "Admiral," Captain Thorne said, her voice tight with urgency. "They're closing in. They've regrouped faster than expected. Their new formations are designed to exploit the gaps in our defense." Kor narrowed her eyes. The Nickari had likely analyzed the Bastion's capabilities, searching for weaknesses in its formidable defenses. The first shot had been decisive, but now they would approach with caution, testing humanity's resolve. "Prepare for their second wave," Kor said, her voice firm. "All ships, ready your weapons. The Bastion can't do it alone. We'll fight alongside it. No retreat." At that moment, Dr. Relis's voice came through the comms, strained but determined. "Admiral, we've had some minor disruptions in the core reactor. The systems are stable, but we'll need another 10 minutes before we can fire again. If we don't hold them off, it'll be too late." Kor's heart sank, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Understood. We hold them off for 10 minutes, no matter the cost." The Nickari ships began to close in, their deadly energy weapons charging. Kor watched the tactical display as they approached the human fleet. The first wave had been destroyed, but now the invaders were more careful, more methodical. The Bastion's shields hummed, ready to absorb the barrage of fire headed its way. But even with its unmatched defenses, humanity's fleet would need to keep the enemy at bay. Focus fire on their flanks, Thorn commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. We need to push them back, give the Bastion the time it needs. Human ships moved into position, forming a tight defensive perimeter around the Bastion. Every ship, no matter how damaged, continued to fight with unwavering resolve. The enemy unleashed a flurry of missiles, each one targeting the exposed human ships. Some ships were hit, their hulls buckling under the impact, but still, they held the line. The Bastion's shield absorbed the first wave of energy blasts, but the second wave hit with more intensity. The force of the impact reverberated through the massive structure, sending shudders through its outer walls. Core could hear the engineers' voices on the comms, their urgency palpable. "We're at maximum capacity, Admiral," one of the engineers reported. "The Bastion is holding, but the power drain is exceeding our projections. We can't afford another long-range shot unless we recalibrate." "Do what you can," Core replied, her voice tight. "We need that cannon operational. Hold for another 10 minutes, just 10 minutes." The battle escalated. The human ships, though outnumbered, fought with unmatched ferocity, targeting the weaker ships of the Nikari fleet. Yet every move they made was met with equal force. The Nikari had adapted, now splitting their attacks between the Bastion's shield and humanity's fleet, knowing that both were key to their survival. Each blast that struck their ships sent ripples through the air, but their damage control teams worked tirelessly, trying to prevent total destruction. Core's thoughts raced as she watched the battle unfold. Every ship, every life mattered now. The Bastion might be their greatest weapon, but humanity's survival depended on the combined might of their forces. She knew the next few minutes would decide everything. If they could hold on, if they could give the Bastion time to fire again, then victory was within reach. But if they failed, Earth's fate would be sealed. As the Nikari pressed forward, the energy levels within the Bastion began to spike once more. Core felt a surge of hope. They're almost there, just a little longer. The Nikari had given humanity no respite, but they had underestimated the strength of the human will. With every pulse of energy that surged from the Bastion, humanity proved that it would not be so easily defeated. No matter the odds, no matter the cost, they would fight to the very end. In the command center, Core watched the enemy ships closing in, their weapons charging. This was the moment, the critical moment. The Bastion's core would either hold, or humanity would face the unimaginable. She felt the weight of the decision, but there was no turning back. "All ships, ready your weapons," Core ordered. "This is the fight for Earth's future. We don't back down." The next few moments would define humanity's place in the galaxy. The Bastion had awakened. Now, it was time for the final stand. The Nikari fleet had encircled the Bastion, their ships slowly closing in like vultures, sensing their prey's weakness. The battle had raged for hours, and despite the human fleet's tenacity, the enemy's overwhelming numbers continued to push them back. Every second felt like a lifetime as Core watched the ships around them begin to buckle under the intensity of the assault. "Admiral, we're losing ships at the perimeter," Captain Thorne shouted, her voice laced with urgency. "The Nikari are targeting our weak points, and we're running low on ammunition. The line is collapsing." Core clenched her fists, her gaze fixed on the battlefield. There was no retreat, no escape. The Bastion was the only thing standing between the Nikari and Earth's final defenses. The Bastion's shields were holding, barely, but for how much longer? "Hold the line," Core barked. "We've bought enough time for the Bastion systems to come online again. We cannot fail now." The Nikari were relentless. Their weapons slammed into the Bastion's shield, sending waves of energy that reverberated through the entire structure. The massive fortress groaned under the pressure, its shields flickering dangerously with each hit. Humanity's fleet fought valiantly, but their numbers were thinning, their ships falling one by one as the Nikari pressed forward. "Admiral," Dr. Relis's voice came over the comms, strained but determined. The Bastion is at 90% power. We can fire again, but we need one last push to activate the full force of the cannon. The core is stabilizing, but we can't do this without your signal. Core didn't hesitate. Do it. Fire when ready. This is our last chance. As the Nikhari pressed forward, closing in on the weakened human ships, the Bastion's energy core began to hum louder, a bright pulse of energy radiating outward. Humanity's fleet, battered but unbroken, took up positions once more, forcing the enemy to divert their fire away from the Bastion. With a deafening roar, the Bastion's primary cannon fired once again. This time, it wasn't a single beam of concentrated energy, it was an inferno. The entire field of battle lit up as the Bastion unleashed its full power, a torrent of destruction that swallowed everything in its path. The beam cut through the Nikhari fleet like a scythe through wheat, obliterating entire ships in the blink of an eye. One by one, the Nikhari ships disintegrated under the onslaught. Their shields, once thought impenetrable, shattered under the Bastion's might. Their hulls cracked, torn apart by the force of the beam, and entire formations were wiped out in a matter of seconds. The human fleet cheered as the Nikhari dreadnoughts began to fall back, their advance halted by the sheer power of the Bastion's weaponry. But even as the tide shifted in their favor, Core knew they weren't out of danger yet. The Nikhari were not ones to retreat easily, and though their fleet was severely damaged, they would regroup. This was not their first defeat. "Admiral," Thorne called, her voice tinged with disbelief. "We've done it. The Nikhari are retreating." Core could hardly believe it. The once unstoppable force had been forced to fall back, broken by the sheer will of humanity, but the victory felt fragile. The Nikhari were resilient. They would be back, and when they returned, they would be stronger, angrier, and even more determined to finish what they had started. For now, though, the immediate danger had passed. The Bastion's cannon had given humanity the upper hand, but the cost of the battle was heavy. The fleet had lost ships, many of them irreparably damaged or destroyed. The human survivors, though victorious, were battered and exhausted. The Bastion's core, though still operational, was running on fumes, and the energy reserves were dangerously low. Core let out a long breath, her mind spinning with what needed to come next. "Captain Thorne, prepare a tactical retreat for the fleet," she ordered. "We need to regroup, assess the damage, and prepare for the Nikhari's next move. They won't stay down for long." She turned her attention back to the Bastion, now a gleaming, albeit damaged, symbol of humanity's strength. The structure was far from perfect. There were cracks in its shield, its power reserves nearly depleted. But it had held. It had delivered when humanity needed it the most. The Bastion was proof that, against all odds, humanity could build something that could stand against the darkness of the universe. Core's gaze hardened. "We may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. We need to prepare for their next assault. We will not falter. Humanity has a future, and we will fight for it." As she spoke, the faintest traces of an incoming Nikhari fleet appeared on the outer rim of the battlefield. The first wave had retreated, but now the true test of humanity's resolve would begin. The Bastion had stood firm, but the galaxy was vast, and the Nikhari were far from finished. Humanity had shown that it would not be easily crushed. But as the Bastion loomed over Earth, Core knew they would need every ounce of strength to face what was coming next. The enemy would return, and when they did, the fight for survival would reach its final, most harrowing chapter. But for now, they had earned a fleeting moment of peace. The Nikhari fleet, though battered, was not gone. The first wave's retreat had been temporary, and the survivors now regrouped, their ships in constant motion as they recalibrated their strategies. Yet, despite the undeniable power of their enemies, Core felt a surge of hope pulse through her. Humanity had survived. The Bastion, Earth's final line of defense, had proven its worth, and with it, humanity had gained a vital advantage. But this victory was fleeting. They had won a battle, not the war. The enemy would return. Kor could feel it in her bones. The Nickari were relentless. They would be back, smarter, fiercer, and more dangerous than before. But humanity was not going to roll over and die. Not now, not ever. The fleet was in disarray. Nearly a third of humanity's ships had been destroyed or rendered inoperable, their remains drifting like debris in the aftermath. The remaining vessels limped into position, their crews battered and exhausted, their spirit only now beginning to lift. There was no time to mourn the dead. No time for victory parades. The future of Earth was still uncertain, and the threat of annihilation loomed large. "Admiral Kor," Captain Thorne said, her voice steady but weary. "The remaining Nickari ships are pulling back. They're regrouping at the edge of the system, but they're not retreating completely. They'll likely launch another assault in the next few hours." Kor's jaw tightened. "Prepare for that assault. We can't afford to let them get any closer to Earth. We'll have to hold them off long enough to repair and resupply the fleet." "Understood," Thorne replied. She hesitated for a moment, then added, "Admiral, we've lost too many ships. Our resources are stretched thin. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Kor looked at the tactical display, the red dots marking the Nickari ships looming ominously at the edge of their radar. The battle had been a brutal test of humanity's strength, and the fleet had taken everything the Nickari had thrown at them. But they had fought back. They had withstood the storm, and they weren't about to let up now. "We fight on," Kor said, her voice unwavering. "Humanity has faced worse and survived. We will face whatever the Nickari bring, and we will crush them." She turned to Dr. Relis, who was hunched over a console, his eyes glued to the data streaming in. "How's the Bastion?" Relis looked up, his face drawn with exhaustion but lit by the fire of determination. "It's holding. Barely. We've rerouted the energy flow and patched some of the weaker points, but it's clear we need time to make full repairs. Another engagement like the last one could cripple us." Kor's eyes scanned the massive structure on the holoscreen. The Bastion stood tall in the heart of the fleet, its massive form a testament to human ingenuity and strength. Despite the damage, it was still operational, still capable of turning the tide in their favor. "Time is a luxury we don't have," Kor said. "But we have something the Nickari don't: resilience. Every battle we fight, every ship we lose, brings us closer to victory. They think we're weak, that we'll crumble under the weight of their war machines. But they're wrong. Humanity has the will to survive. We'll make sure of it." A silence fell over the command deck as the reality of their situation set in. The Nickari weren't just invaders. They were predators. They would take everything they could, destroy everything in their path. But humanity wasn't just going to stand by and let that happen. The Bastion, Earth's last line of defense, wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol. A symbol of humanity's refusal to be erased from the galaxy. "We have a choice," Kor continued, her voice now rising with conviction. "We can roll over and let the Nickari destroy us, or we can stand, fight with everything we have, and show the galaxy that humanity is not a species to be underestimated. We have the Bastion, we have each other, and we will never stop fighting." The crew, weary as they were, nodded in agreement. There was no question now. They were going to win or die trying. The Nickari fleet, still at the edge of the system, seemed to sense the change in the air. They were regrouping, preparing for their next strike, but they had no idea what they were up against. Humanity wasn't the easy target they had believed it to be. And now, as the fleet rallied for one final stand, Admiral Kor watched the incoming Nickari ships with a newfound resolve. Earth would be protected. Humanity's will would not be broken. The Bastion would stand strong. For the first time since the invasion began, Kor smiled. "Let's finish this." The Bastion's cannon, its energy reserves restored and primed, hummed with power. The first shot would be the beginning of the end for the Nickari. Humanity was ready. The galaxy had underestimated the human spirit, and soon the Nick Harry would learn what it meant to face the true might of humanity's resolve.